The sun beat down on the cotton fields of the Beaumont plantation, baking the soil and the backs of the slaves who toiled endlessly beneath its gaze. Young Caleb, barely 10 years old, already knew the sting of the whip and the gnawing ache of hunger. His days were a monotonous cycle of picking cotton, his small hands struggling to keep pace with the older workers. But unlike many, Caleb possessed a keen mind and a quiet spirit of defiance that smoldered beneath the surface. While others might succumb to despair, Caleb observed. He watched the overseer, noting his cruelty and his weaknesses. He listened to the whispered conversations among the older slaves, piecing together fragments of information about the world beyond the plantation's borders. He learned to read, secretly tracing letters in the dirt with a twig, mimicking the words he overheard the master reading aloud. Caleb was small for his age, but wiry and quick. He moved with a silent grace, always aware of his surroundings. He understood that survival depended on obedience, but in his heart, a fierce determination grew. He yearned for freedom, not just for himself, but for his mother, whose eyes held a deep sadness, and for the other slaves who suffered under the yoke of bondage. His intelligence set him apart. He could solve problems quickly, remember details others forgot, and anticipate the needs of those around him. The older slaves recognized his potential and secretly shared their knowledge, teaching him about herbal remedies, animal tracking, and the constellations in the night sky. These skills, they knew, might one day be his salvation. Though his life was one of hardship and oppression, Caleb never lost hope. He clung to the belief that one day he would escape the Beaumont plantation and find a place where he could be free, where his worth would be measured not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. This dream fueled his determination and gave him the strength to endure the daily injustices he faced. One sweltering afternoon, while working in the fields, Caleb witnessed an act of unspeakable cruelty. A young slave girl, no older than 7, accidentally dropped a bucket of water meant for the overseer's horse. Enraged, the overseer lashed out, striking the girl repeatedly with his whip. The other slaves watched in horror, unable to intervene for fear of suffering the same fate. Caleb, though small, felt a surge of anger he had never experienced before. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He wanted to run, to hide, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from the scene unfolding before him. The girl's cries echoed across the fields, piercing the heavy air. Finally, old Mama Rose, the plantation's midwife and a woman of immense strength and wisdom, stepped forward. She pleaded with the overseer to stop, reminding him that the girl was just a child. The overseer, fueled by rage and a sense of power, ignored her pleas and continued his brutal assault. Suddenly, Caleb acted. He didn't think, he just moved. He darted forward, placing himself between the overseer and the terrified girl. The overseer, surprised by this act of defiance, paused, his whip still raised. "Stop it," Caleb cried, his voice trembling but firm. "She didn't mean it." The overseer glared down at the young slave, his eyes filled with contempt. "Get out of my way, boy," he snarled, "or you'll be next." Caleb stood his ground, his small body shaking, but his gaze unwavering. He knew he was risking his life, but he couldn't stand by and watch another person suffer. In that moment, something inside him solidified. The quiet defiance that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into a burning conviction. He would not be a victim. He would fight for justice, even if it meant facing death itself. The overseer, momentarily taken aback by Caleb's courage, hesitated. Mama Rose seized the opportunity, pulling the girl to safety and shielding her from further harm. The overseer, realizing he was losing control of the situation, cursed and stormed away, promising to deal with Caleb later. That day, Caleb learned a valuable lesson, that even in the face of overwhelming power, one person's act of courage could make a difference. The image of the girl's suffering and his own act of defiance would forever be etched in his memory, fueling his determination to escape slavery and fight for a better world. The rumblings of war reached even the isolated Beaumont plantation. Whispers of battles, of a divided nation, and of freedom for the slaves spread like wildfire through the fields and the slave quarters. Caleb listened intently, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He knew that the war presented an opportunity, a chance to break free from the chains of slavery. One starless night, under the watchful eyes of Mama Rose and a few trusted elders, Caleb made his decision. He would run. He would join the Union Army and fight for his freedom and the freedom of his people. The elders provided him with a small pouch of dried meat, a tattered map showing the general direction of Union lines, and a whispered blessing. The escape was fraught with danger. Caleb navigated through dense forests and treacherous swamps, relying on the skills he had learned from the older slaves. He avoided patrols of Confederate soldiers and slave catchers, his heart pounding in his chest with every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, but the thought of freedom kept him going. After days of relentless travel, he finally reached the Union lines. He was greeted with suspicion and skepticism. A young black boy, alone and ragged, claiming to want to fight for the Union. Many doubted his sincerity, but Caleb stood tall, his eyes filled with unwavering determination. He spoke of the injustices he had witnessed, of his burning desire for freedom, and of his willingness to fight for it. His words, spoken with such conviction, impressed the Union officers. They saw in him a spark of courage and a fierce determination that could not be denied. They decided to take a chance on him. Caleb was given a uniform, a rifle, and a place in a colored regiment. He was finally a soldier, fighting for his own liberation. The journey had been perilous, but he had made it. Now, the real battle was about to begin. He was ready. He would face any challenge, endure any hardship, to earn the freedom he so desperately craved. Life in the Union Army was a stark contrast to the cotton fields of Beaumont Plantation, yet it was no less demanding. Caleb, now known as Private Caleb Beaumont, threw himself into his training with unwavering dedication. He learned to handle a rifle with precision, to march for miles without complaint, and to follow orders without question. His small stature initially made him an easy target for mockery, but Caleb's determination and quick wit soon silenced his doubters. He excelled at target practice, his keen eyesight and steady hand making him one of the best marksmen in his company. He also proved to be a quick learner, mastering military tactics and strategy with surprising ease. Caleb's courage on the battlefield quickly earned him the respect of his fellow soldiers, both black and white. He fought in several major battles, facing the horrors of war with unwavering bravery. He witnessed death and destruction firsthand, but he never lost sight of the cause he was fighting for: freedom and equality. During one particularly fierce battle, Caleb distinguished himself by rescuing a wounded officer from behind enemy lines. Under heavy fire, he crawled through the mud and debris, dragging the officer to safety. His actions earned him a Medal of Valor and the admiration of the entire regiment. Beyond his courage, Caleb's sharp mind and natural leadership abilities also began to shine. He was often called upon to scout enemy positions, gather intelligence, and lead small patrols. He proved to be resourceful, intelligent, and decisive, qualities that made him a valuable asset to the Union Army. As the war raged on, Caleb rose through the ranks, eventually earning a commission as a sergeant. He led his men with fairness and compassion, always putting their needs before his own. He became a symbol of hope and inspiration for the other black soldiers in his regiment, proving that they were just as capable and courageous as their white counterparts. The horrors of war tested him, but they also forged him into a leader, a warrior, and a man of unwavering principle. The Civil War finally ended, leaving a nation scarred and divided. Caleb, now a seasoned veteran, returned to a world that was supposed to be different, a world where slavery was abolished and all men were created equal. But the reality was far from the promise. Prejudice and discrimination still ran rampant, especially in the South. Caleb found it difficult to find work. Many white employers refused to hire a black man, even one who had served his country with distinction. He faced constant insults and indignities, a stark reminder that freedom on paper didn't always translate to freedom in practice. Disheartened but not defeated, Caleb decided to head west. He had heard stories of a land of opportunity, where men were judged by their skills and their character, not by the color of their skin. He packed his few belongings, including his army rifle and his Medal of Valor, and set out on a journey into the unknown. The journey west was long and arduous, filled with challenges and hardships. Caleb worked odd jobs along the way, driving wagons, breaking horses, and even working as a cook in a traveling circus. He encountered both kindness and cruelty, experiencing the best and worst of humanity. He witnessed firsthand the lawlessness of the frontier, the struggles of settlers trying to build new lives, and the conflict between ranchers, farmers, and Native Americans. He saw the potential for a better future, but he also recognized the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Despite the prejudice he continued to face, Caleb remained optimistic. He believed that the West offered a chance to build a new life, to prove his worth, and to make a difference in a world that desperately needed justice and order. He carried with him the lessons he had learned in the army: courage, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. The West was calling, and Caleb was determined to answer. After months of travel, Caleb arrived in Redemption, a town that lived up to its name only in its ironic quality. Nestled in a dusty valley between jagged mountains, Redemption was a haven for outlaws, gamblers, and those looking to escape the long arm of the law. Buildings were slapped together from rough-hewn lumber. The main street was perpetually muddy, and the air hung thick with the smells of whiskey, stale beer, and unwashed bodies. The town was ruled by a corrupt saloon owner named Silas Blackwood, a man who held the local sheriff in his pocket and ran the town with an iron fist. Blackwood's gang of thugs roamed freely, intimidating residents, extorting businesses, and generally making life miserable for anyone who dared to cross them. Racial tension simmered just beneath the surface. Though Redemption was ostensibly a free town, the few black residents were relegated to the lowest rungs of society, facing constant discrimination and threats. They lived in fear, knowing that any perceived slight could result in violence or worse. Caleb, with his dark skin and quiet demeanor, immediately drew attention. He arrived in town with little more than the clothes on his back, his rifle, and his unwavering sense of purpose. He quickly learned that Redemption was a place where survival depended on toughness, resourcefulness, and a willingness to stand up for what was right. The existing sheriff, a weak and cowardly man named Brady, turned a blind eye to most of the town's problems, content to collect his paycheck and avoid crossing Blackwood. He was more interested in a stiff drink than upholding the law. Caleb saw the desperation in the eyes of the townsfolk, the longing for a sense of justice and security. He knew that Redemption needed a strong hand, someone who was willing to stand up to Blackwood and his gang. He didn't know how, but he felt a growing sense of responsibility to help this troubled town find its way. He was about to find out that Redemption wasn't just a name, but a battle. Needing work, Caleb sought out the owner of the largest ranch outside of town, a gruff but fair man named Jedediah Jed Stone. Jed was known for his skill with horses and his no-nonsense approach to ranching. Despite the prevailing prejudices, Jed hired Caleb on the spot, impressed by his strong hands and quiet confidence. Caleb quickly proved his worth as a ranch hand. He had a natural way with horses, able to calm the most skittish animals with a gentle touch and a soothing voice. He was also a hard worker, never shying away from the toughest tasks. He could ride, rope, and brand cattle with the best of them. He also showed an unwavering sense of justice. One day, he witnessed one of Jed's foremen mistreating a young apprentice, a boy named Billy. The foreman was known for his cruelty, often using excessive force to discipline the ranch hands. Caleb stepped in, calmly but firmly telling the foreman to stop. The foreman, taken aback by Caleb's audacity, threatened him, but Caleb stood his ground, his eyes unwavering. Jed, witnessing the confrontation, intervened, siding with Caleb and reprimanding the foreman. News of Caleb's courage and his skill with horses spread quickly through Redemption. Even Sheriff Brady, the cowardly lawman, took notice. He saw in Caleb a potential ally, someone who could help him maintain order in the increasingly volatile town. One afternoon, while Caleb was breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang, Sheriff Brady approached him. He offered Caleb a position as a deputy, recognizing his abilities and hoping to gain some measure of respectability by associating himself with a man of Caleb's character. Caleb politely declined, explaining that he wasn't interested in law enforcement. He just wanted to earn an honest living and live in peace. But the seed had been planted. The sheriff's offer lingered in his mind, a reminder that Redemption needed someone to stand up for what was right. He also understood that being a ranch hand might not be enough to truly make a difference. The inevitable happened. Sheriff Brady, emboldened by whiskey and a foolish sense of bravado, finally confronted Silas Blackwood. It was a disaster. Blackwood and his gang quickly overpowered Brady, leaving him bleeding and broken in the middle of the street. Blackwood then delivered a chilling message to the town. Anyone who dared to challenge his authority would meet the same fate. Brady lingered for a few days, but the wounds were too severe. He died a slow and painful death, leaving Redemption without a sheriff and firmly under Blackwood's control. Fear gripped the town. No one dared to speak out against Blackwood, knowing the consequences would be swift and brutal. A town meeting was called, but it quickly devolved into a shouting match. Some residents wanted to send for help from a neighboring town, but others feared that would take too long. Some even suggested giving in to Blackwood's demands, hoping to appease him and avoid further bloodshed. Amidst the chaos, Jed Stone stood up. He spoke of Caleb's courage, his skill, and his unwavering sense of justice. He argued that Caleb was the only man who could stand up to Blackwood and restore order to Redemption. The suggestion was met with stunned silence, followed by a wave of angry protests. Many residents, blinded by prejudice, couldn't imagine a black man serving as their sheriff. They voiced their objections, citing Caleb's race and his lack of experience in law enforcement. But Jed was not deterred. He reminded them that Caleb had served with distinction in the Union Army, that he had proven his courage on the battlefield, and that he had already demonstrated his willingness to stand up for what was right. He argued that Redemption needed a strong leader regardless of his race. To everyone's surprise, a few other residents spoke out in support of Caleb. They had witnessed his kindness, his integrity, and his quiet strength. They believed that he was the only hope for Redemption. The debate raged on for hours, but finally, a vote was called. The results were close, but in the end, Caleb was chosen as the new sheriff of Redemption. It was a momentous decision, a sign that even in the lawless West, prejudice could be overcome by courage and a desperate need for justice. Now, all they needed was Caleb's agreement. The next morning, a delegation of townsfolk, led by Jed Stone, arrived at the ranch to formally offer Caleb the position of sheriff. Caleb listened intently as Jed explained the situation, the desperation of the town, and the hope that he represented. He also acknowledged the prejudice that Caleb would face and the dangers that lay ahead. Caleb considered the offer carefully. He had come to the West seeking peace and a fresh start, not conflict and responsibility. He knew that accepting the position of sheriff would mean putting his life on the line, facing the wrath of Silas Blackwood, and battling the deep-seated prejudices of many of the town's residents. He thought of his mother, of the slaves he had left behind on the Beaumont plantation, of the soldiers he had fought alongside in the Civil War. He realized that he couldn't turn his back on Redemption. He had a responsibility to use his skills and his courage to make a difference, to create a better world for himself and for others. "I'll do it," Caleb said finally, his voice firm and resolute. "I'll be your sheriff." A collective sigh of relief swept through the delegation. Jed clapped Caleb on the shoulder, a broad smile on his face. He knew that Caleb had made the right decision. As Caleb prepared to take on his new role, he knew that he faced an uphill battle. Blackwood's gang was ruthless and well-armed. Many of the townspeople were openly hostile to the idea of a black sheriff. And the town itself was rife with corruption and lawlessness. His first act was to survey the town and assess the situation. He walked the streets, observing the people, the buildings, and the overall atmosphere. He quickly realized that redemption was a powder keg ready to explode. Blackwood, upon hearing the news of Caleb's appointment, was furious. He vowed to make Caleb's life a living hell and to run him out of town, one way or another. The battle for redemption was about to begin, and Caleb was ready to fight. He understood that his journey to become the first black sheriff of a lawless western town was not just about law and order, but about challenging the very foundations of prejudice. Caleb's first day as sheriff was a baptism by fire. He walked into the sheriff's office, a dusty and neglected room, and found it empty. No deputies, no records, just a desk, a chair, and a couple of old wanted posters. He was on his own. As he settled in, a group of Blackwood's thugs swaggered into the office, led by a hulking brute named Big Joe. They made it clear that they didn't recognize Caleb's authority and that they would continue to do whatever they pleased. Caleb listened calmly, his eyes narrowed. He told them that things were going to change in redemption and that he would not tolerate any lawlessness. Big Joe scoffed. "What are you going to do about it, boy?" he sneered. Caleb stood up, his gaze unwavering. "I'm the sheriff," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's my job to enforce the law, and that's exactly what I intend to do." Big Joe and his gang laughed, but Caleb didn't flinch. He knew that he couldn't back down. He had to establish his authority from the outset. He drew his gun, a Colt Peacemaker he had carried throughout the Civil War, and pointed it at Big Joe. "Get out of my office," he said, "and tell Blackwood that I'm coming for him." Big Joe hesitated, surprised by Caleb's resolve. He knew that Caleb was a skilled gunfighter, and he wasn't willing to risk a shootout. He and his gang backed down, muttering threats as they left the office. News of Caleb's confrontation with Blackwood's gang spread quickly through the town. Some residents were impressed by his courage, while others were skeptical, believing that he was no match for Blackwood. The openly hostile residents made their feelings known with stares, whispers, and outright insults. Caleb ignored them, focusing on his job. He knew that he couldn't win everyone over, but he hoped to earn their respect by enforcing the law fairly and justly. The real work, he knew, was only just beginning. He had to find a way to break Blackwood's hold on redemption and bring peace to the troubled town. He started by investigating recent crimes and making a list of Blackwood's known associates. The task ahead seemed daunting, but Caleb was determined to succeed. He was the sheriff, and he would not back down. Caleb began his campaign to clean up redemption methodically. He started with the small things, enforcing ordinances that had long been ignored, cracking down on public drunkenness, gambling, and petty theft. He used his wit and his understanding of human nature to diffuse tense situations, often talking down troublemakers instead of resorting to violence. He also made it clear that he would not tolerate any discrimination or mistreatment of the town's black residents. He personally intervened in several incidents, ensuring that they were treated fairly and with respect. This earned him the gratitude of the black community and the grudging respect of some of the white residents. His gunfighting skills were also put to the test. On several occasions, he had to defend himself against Blackwood's thugs who tried to intimidate him and disrupt his efforts. Caleb was a crack shot, and he always managed to outdraw his opponents, either wounding them or forcing them to retreat. One notable incident involved a stagecoach robbery. Blackwood's gang had ambushed the stagecoach outside of town, stealing money and valuables from the passengers. Caleb, along with a few brave volunteers, tracked down the gang and engaged them in a fierce shootout. Caleb's leadership and his sharpshooting skills were instrumental in defeating the outlaws and recovering the stolen goods. Slowly but surely, Caleb began to win over some of the townsfolk. They saw that he was a fair and honest lawman, someone who was willing to risk his life to protect them. They started to trust him, to respect him, and even to admire him. However, Blackwood remained a powerful and dangerous enemy. He continued to plot against Caleb, using his wealth and influence to undermine his authority. He spread rumors, bribed officials, and even hired assassins to try to kill Caleb. Despite the constant threats and challenges, Caleb remained steadfast in his commitment to cleaning up redemption. He knew that it would be a long and difficult struggle, but he was determined to see it through. The small steps he was taking were making a difference. The town was slowly changing, and so were the hearts of some of its residents. The final showdown came on a stormy night. Blackwood, desperate to regain control of redemption, gathered his entire gang and launched a full-scale assault on the town. They rode in guns blazing, shooting up buildings, terrorizing residents, and making it clear that they were back in charge. Caleb, along with a handful of loyal townsfolk, barricaded themselves inside the sheriff's office, preparing to make a final stand. The odds were overwhelmingly against them. Blackwood's gang outnumbered them by at least 3-1, and they had superior firepower. As the outlaws surrounded the office, Blackwood shouted a challenge, demanding that Caleb surrender. Caleb refused. He knew that surrendering would mean the end of redemption, a return to lawlessness and corruption. He was determined to fight to the bitter end. The shootout was intense and chaotic. Bullets flew in all directions, shattering windows and tearing through walls. Caleb and his allies fought bravely, using their skill and their determination to hold off the attackers. Caleb moved with a speed and precision honed from his time in the war, taking down outlaw after outlaw. During a lull in the fighting, Jed Stone managed to slip out of the office and rally some of the townsfolk who had been hesitant to join the fight. He reminded them that Caleb was fighting for their freedom and their future, and that they needed to stand with him. Inspired by Jed's words, a group of townsfolk, both black and white, armed themselves and joined the battle. They attacked Blackwood's gang from the rear, catching them by surprise and turning the tide of the fight. Caleb, seeing the opportunity, led a counterattack, charging out of the sheriff's office and engaging Blackwood in a one-on-one duel. The two men faced each other in the middle of the street, their guns drawn, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. The fate of redemption hung in the balance. It was a test of everything Caleb had learned. His courage, his skill, and his unwavering belief in justice would decide the outcome. The duel was swift and decisive. Both men drew their guns at the same time, but Caleb was faster, more accurate. His bullet found its mark, striking Blackwood in the chest. The saloon owner staggered, his eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing to the muddy street. With Blackwood defeated, his gang quickly lost heart. Some fled into the night, while others surrendered to Caleb and the townsfolk. The battle was over. Redemption was finally free. In the aftermath of the shootout, Caleb was hailed as a hero. The townsfolk, black and white, gathered around him, expressing their gratitude and their admiration. They had witnessed his courage, his skill, and his unwavering commitment to justice. They finally understood that he was the leader they had been waiting for. The prejudice that had once divided redemption began to fade away. People started to see each other as individuals, not as members of different races. They realized that they had more in common than they had differences. Caleb set about rebuilding redemption, establishing a fair and just legal system, cracking down on corruption, and promoting equality for all. He appointed deputies who shared his values, men and women who were committed to serving the community. He also worked to improve the town's infrastructure, building new schools, hospitals, and roads. He encouraged new businesses to come to redemption, creating jobs and opportunities for the residents. Under Caleb's leadership, redemption transformed from a lawless town into a thriving community. It became a beacon of hope in the West, a place where people of all races could live together in peace and harmony. Caleb had proven his worth, not just as a gunfighter, but as a leader, a peacemaker, and a champion of justice. He had earned the true respect of the community, not because of the color of his skin, but because of the content of his character. He had shown them that anything was possible if they were willing to work together and fight for what was right. Redemption was truly redeemed. Years passed. Redemption continued to prosper under Caleb's guidance. He remained sheriff, a respected and beloved figure in the town. He often sat on the porch of his small house, watching the children play in the streets, listening to the laughter of the townsfolk and reflecting on his remarkable journey. He remembered the harsh days of slavery on the Beaumont plantation, the sting of the whip, the gnawing ache of hunger. He remembered the brutal beating of the young slave girl and the surge of anger that had propelled him to action. He remembered his daring escape, his perilous journey to freedom, and the horrors he had witnessed on the battlefields of the Civil War. He acknowledged the pain of his past, the prejudice he had faced, and the hardships he had endured. But he refused to let those experiences define him. He had learned from them, grown from them, and emerged stronger and more determined than ever. He also remembered the kindness and support he had received along the way. The wisdom of Mama Rose, the courage of his fellow soldiers, the unwavering friendship of Jed Stone, and the loyalty of the townsfolk who had stood by him in his darkest hour. He realized that he was not alone. He was part of a community, a family, a larger story of hope and resilience. He had found his place in the world, a place where he could make a difference, a place where he could be judged on his merits, not on the color of his skin. He embraced his role as a symbol of hope and justice in the West. He knew that his story inspired others, that it showed them that anything was possible if they were willing to fight for their dreams. He took that responsibility seriously, always striving to live up to the ideals he espoused. He often wondered what his mother would think of him, if she could see him now. He imagined her smiling, her eyes filled with pride. He knew that he had honored her memory, that he had lived a life worthy of her love. As the sun set over redemption, casting a golden glow on the town, Caleb smiled. He had come a long way from the cotton fields of Beaumont Plantation. He had faced unimaginable challenges, but he had overcome them all. He was the first black sheriff of a lawless western town, and he had earned his place in history. The camera pans out, showing Caleb, now an older man, his face etched with the lines of time and experience, but his eyes still sharp and full of life. He stands tall, his shoulders straight, his silver sheriff's badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. He surveys redemption, a town that has been transformed by his unwavering spirit and his commitment to justice. The muddy streets have been replaced with paved roads, lined with thriving businesses and well-maintained homes. Children of all races play together in the town square, their laughter echoing through the air. The atmosphere is one of peace, prosperity, and harmony. He sees Jed Stone walking down the street, his gait a little slower now, but his smile still as warm and genuine as ever. He sees families picnicking in the park, farmers selling their produce at the market, and workers building new homes on the outskirts of town. He thinks of all the people who had helped him along the way, the people who had believed in him, the people who had stood by him in his darkest hour. He realizes that he could not have done it alone. He was part of something larger than himself, a community of people who were committed to building a better future. He smiles a deep and heartfelt smile that reflects the satisfaction of a life well lived. He knows that he has made a difference, that he has left the world a better place than he found it. The camera focuses on a sign hanging above the sheriff's office. Redemption, a town of hope and justice. It is a testament to Caleb's unwavering spirit and the possibility of overcoming prejudice. It is a reminder that even in the most lawless and divided places, anything is possible if people are willing to work together and fight for what is right. As the sun sets, casting a warm and golden glow over redemption, Caleb turns and walks back toward his house, his head held high, his heart filled with pride. He is the first black sheriff of a lawless western town, and his legacy will live on for generations to come. The screen fades to black. The end.